Hello, my name is Matt Otwell and I am the creator of Project Studio Handbook, and this is the first video that I filmed and uploaded in 5 years. Now, I'm sure you'll agree with me that if you want to build an audience in YouTube and a channel, then you don't wait 5 years to create a video. There's a very good reason for this. So the purpose of this video is to give you an update about the channel. I'm going to talk about 3 things. Firstly, I'm going to explain why the channel went dormant 5 years ago and why we haven't created any new videos. Then I'm going to talk about what we're going to do next. We are going to create some more content for the channel, but not quite perhaps what you would expect. And finally, I'm going to talk about how Project Studio Handbook came to be, what the ideas behind it were. I'll leave it till last. You may not want to watch that. That'll be a bit tedious. It just gives you a little bit of background into the ideas behind the channel. I'm going to go into some depth perhaps about that, but as I say, you can just skip that and just watch the first few bits. So, firstly, a really simple answer as to why we stopped making videos 5 years ago, and that is that we had a death in the family, and that made it impossible for me to create videos. I needed to devote my time to my children and to work and all the rest of it, and I was in no mood to be creating technical videos at the time. Now, at the time that I actually stopped making the videos, we had quite a few playlists left to complete. We hadn't done equalization, reverberation, synthesis is a very big one, of course, and we were in the middle of doing the digital audio playlist, which was analog to digital conversion, and there was lots and lots of technical detail in that that was going to be very useful to you, I'm sure. We'd actually written the scripts for all of that, but we didn't get around to filming it, so we kind of stopped that dead there. Now, the bad news is I don't think I'm going to get back to making these videos. They take quite a long time to do. When we initially launched, which was about 8 years ago, I think, I spent several months making a complete playlist for interconnection. Every video is scripted, and then I have to perform it. You may have noticed that some of my performances are quite wooden. That's because I'm either trying to remember the exact script that I'm speaking to the camera, or I'm using an auto cue. And the reason that we scripted them is we wanted to make sure there were no technical errors and no ambiguities. It's really easy if you're just speaking off the cuff like I am now to make errors, and when you're trying to impart some technical information, some theory information, you really need to be bang on. Also, there were no opinions in any of those videos. All of my personal opinions were absent. It was just purely objective, helpful technical information. Therefore, making the videos was a lot of work. You couldn't just sit and talk like I am now. You had to actually make sure and consider everything you were saying, and you were articulating it as well as you could, and just being really clear and coherent. So it was a lot of work to make a video. We settled down to making, I think, 1 video every month, and we were looking at another 2 or 3 years of doing that to create all of the videos. And when this thing happened in the family, it was just impossible for me to do that. So apologies if you've subscribed to the channel. You were looking forward to the rest of those videos on digital audios and the other subjects that were upcoming. I'm really sorry. I don't think I'm going to make them. Maybe I will, but because it's a lot of work, I think it's unlikely. So, secondly, what are we going to do now with the channel? Well, there's a couple of things I'd like to do. The first thing to say is that I'm a home studio owner, and I've been a home studio owner for 40 years. My studio isn't in my home anymore, but in essence, it is a home studio. I've collected equipment, I've built the studio over a long period of time, and I've got a lot of opinions about that process, and I'd like to share them with you. So I'm going to do a few videos which are, to all intents and purposes, a studio tour of this studio here. And I'm going to talk about the gear I brought over the years, how I brought it, why I brought it, often because it was cost effective, the time I bought it. Often I bought bits of gear years after they first came out when I got them cheap on eBay. Thank God for eBay, eh? We couldn't afford most of this stuff if we didn't have eBay. And also my ideas for why I brought the gear, how I connected it together, how I was going to use it, how I made it flexible. So I'm going to do maybe 2 or 3 videos going through the studio, and it's not going to be one of those studio tours where I just say, this microphone preamplifier is fantastic or something like that. I'm not going to do that. It's boring. I'm going to talk about why I bought it, how I use it, and if it's any good perhaps. I'm also actually going to express a few opinions on this video. There's a lot of stuff out there which kind of comes from marketing, And a lot of people are probably thinking they need to have this or they need to have that, or this is important or that's important. A lot of that stuff I don't agree with, and I'm always very suspicious of people who advocate the bits of gear that make young users and young people getting into recording feel that they're inadequate because they don't have it. That is no longer true. Nearly any bit of gear that you buy has creative potential. We all know that, because old bits of gear that get put to the side by professionals are taken up by the next generation of music makers, and they do something original and creative with it that was never thought possible before. So I'm going to put a few of my own personal opinions about that. I absolutely hate the idea of this cork sniffing one-upmanship about gear. Whatever you've got, you can make great music with it. So there's going to be a bit of that in there. Now I'm also going to do a video about studio ergonomics. I've spent an awful lot of time getting my studio to a state where I can turn up, open the door, switch it on and be creative straight away. Not have to mess around plugging things in, not have any barriers between a creative idea and making the music. And I want to share those with you. A lot of them are really simple things you can do. So I'm going to do a bit about that. And then I'm going to make a video, I think, about MDF and casters. I love MDF and casters. The most flexible way to build studio furniture, and cheap, and to make your studio future-proof. The one thing that we all know as studio owners is that whatever gear you have now, you're going to change it. Some stuff you're going to keep, but your likelihood is you're going to move on to something else. Buy, sell. Hey, we have these great auction sites out there like Reverb and eBay, and we can do that any time we want. So making a flexible studio that can accommodate all the changes you have is really important. So MDF and casters. I did consider calling this studio the Temple of MDF once, because it's full of it, as you will see. Okay, so that's what's coming up next in the next few weeks, or when I can get round to making these videos. Thirdly, let me just talk a little bit about how Project Studio came to be. And by the way, you may not want to hear this. This isn't particularly interesting, or maybe it is, but I'm just going to talk about the ideas behind it and a little bit about my history. If you're not going to watch this, thank you very much for watching so far, and I'll see you in a few weeks' time. So, Project Studio Handbook came about as a result of teaching at the Institute of Music and Technology in London, where I live. Now, the Institute of Music and Technology was a great organisation started by a gentleman called Phil McDonnell, and his idea was to provide training in audio and music technology, which was expanding at the time. We're going back about 20 years now. To people who had no access to it. Now that means that we were training adults, long-term unemployed, people who had been had drug dependency problems, people who were ex-offenders, people who were politically and socially disenfranchised. They could come to IMT, the government would pay for them to do courses in sound recording, music technology, digital media, video, those kind of things. And we were dedicated down there, the team, who were all ex-musicians, music business, engineers. We were dedicated down there to teaching these people how to get a foothold in the industry. Remember, it was different back then. There were jobs in the industry, in studios. There were hundreds and hundreds of studios in London alone. So we would wind up down at IMT. We would all turn up down at IMT. The students would come in the morning, of course. We'd had various studio rooms in the building we had there, and we would teach them City and Guilds qualifications. Now, City and Guilds qualifications, if you're in the UK, you'll know about them. They're a really well-respected awarding body, and we'd written 4, I think, qualifications. I'd written digital media, I think it was called New Media, and I'd updated a music technology qualification, and there were 2 sound recording qualifications. And we taught the students these qualifications and awarded them certificates to help them get employment in the industry. In the States, you may not be aware of City and Guilds, and I don't know what the equivalent would be, but it's a very old awarding body over here, very robust. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to write a qualification and have it verified by them. Okay, so we had these qualifications, and all of these qualifications had 2 elements. They had units in them, so there were 10 units. For example, in the music technology qualification, there was computing, there was synthesis, there was multi-track recording, which of course started with tape recorders, then evolved into DAWs. There was effects, there was MIDI sequencing, all that kind of stuff that you would expect. And every one of these units had some practical stuff the student had to do and some technical stuff, some theory. So for example, they might need to program a synthesizer to demonstrate they could make various sounds and understood how it worked, but they'd also need to answer questions about modifiers and controllers and the oscillators and the way, the structure that the synthesizer worked. We're talking about an analog synthesizer because that's the best way to learn synthesis. So there were two elements. Now the practical side of it, we all found that quite easy to teach the students. You showed them, they practiced again, they learned how to use the synthesizer or the effects processor or the multi-track recorder or the SEMT synchronizers. Yes, that's right, we were doing SEMT synchronization to tape as well in the early days. Or equalization using the mixing desk and routing signals, whatever it was, and we would assess them on that and pass them in that. The difficulty came when we were teaching theory. Now, as you know, Project Studio Handbook is all about theory. And what we wanted to do, we wanted to not teach them theory to the degree that they were going to be electronic engineers or maintenance engineers in a studio. We wanted to give them the theory that gave them a kind of insight and a background to be able to use the equipment creatively. So if you're using an analog synthesizer, it's really helpful to understand that the sound, for example, doesn't pass through the envelope. The envelope sends a control voltage, or in modern day, the digital signal, to LFOs, to filters, to the amplifier to control it over time. That kind of thing. And that applied to every unit. Now, some of the units were okay, and we had well sort of sorted out ways in which we would teach them. I used to sit on in lessons in the early days with some of the lecturers that are there, some fantastic lecturers, and I learned a lot about how to teach certain subjects. And then other subjects were really challenging to teach. For example, teaching analog to digital conversion and finding a way of teaching that is quite challenging to somebody who has no frames of reference. Also, things like time domain effects, which is tape delay essentially. All those effects from phasing, flanging, chorus, ADT, double tracking, right up to conventional effects. They were difficult. But over a period of years, between us, and we would go to lunch and talk about it as well, we developed ways in which we could teach the theory. Okay, so time moved on. We had handouts, we had a website, all that kind of stuff. Then YouTube happened. IMT continued, and I left it about 10 years ago, I think, moved on. And I thought, all this theory knowledge that I had, wouldn't it be great to make videos so that we could just get it out there? I had benefited, like you have, from free stuff on the web. I'd learned an awful lot. I had a huge amount of knowledge from my years in the music industry as a sound engineer and a producer. And I thought this would be great. I can actually put some videos out there that I've never done before, put them on YouTube, share this knowledge, not expecting any fees or any money from it. God knows, making a YouTube channel about technical sound recording theory is never going to make you a fortune. It's a very niche thing. Only the most serious music makers are going to be interested in understanding about, you know, all the minutiae of sound recording. You know, try teaching someone sound wave theory if they're not interested. They're just not going to hear you. So it was never going to be a big channel, but I felt that it was a great thing to do, to just put the information out there, just spread it around and do it in a way that was useful to somebody who wanted to record music or operate the gear, but not maintain it. So not down to that degree of a maintenance engineer or an electronics designer. So that was the concept of it. And of course, therefore, we found ways, and I found ways of teaching theory that was useful. Sometimes the theory that we teach is not absolutely technically accurate, and people can criticize it for that. But in fact, how technically accurate do you want to get when you're talking about electricity? Do you want to talk about the wave-particle duality? And you're not going to go there, are you, with that? But you are going to try and create theory and theoretical concepts in people's heads that really help them to understand, so they can go to a piece of equipment with a creative idea in mind. Remember, I'm a musician primarily. I got into sound engineering production because I'm a musician and a composer. So with a creative idea in mind, and you'd be able to realise that without frustration. We've all been in a situation where we wanted to create something in the studio, we were confronted with a piece of gear and we had no idea how to use it. That has happened to me for years. Remember? 40 years journey this has been, building the studio and understanding this stuff. I think it's called an obsession. Do you have that obsession too? Perhaps you do. So, this is how Project Studio Handbook came to be. And this is where we are now. There's a whole load of videos up on the website that I'm very proud of. I don't think we're going to be putting any more up. And that's about all I've got to say about it just for the moment. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least you found it informative. As I say, the next thing for me is to make some videos about this studio that I'm sitting in and talk about the gear. And I hope that you're going to find that useful. I will begin that in the next few weeks. So what do they say? Subscribe, click the bell, whatnot, if you want to watch those videos. And I'll look forward to seeing you back when I do that. And guys, thanks very much for watching this video if you've got through to the end. You really are a serious music maker. And thanks for listening to me bang on about this stuff. It's an obsession for me. It's probably a deep interest and obsession for you. And I'll see you next time round. Thanks.